We spend our lives communicating. In the past 50 years, we have zoomed radically all through different forms of communication. From typewriters, how many in this room have actually had and used a typewriter? I'm dating myself. Oh, good, lots of us. To tablet computers, how many people have an iPad? Yes. To text messages and to tweeting. We generate more and more words with each passing day. Tonight's speaker knows that hiding in that deluge of language are amazing insights into who we are, how we think, and what we feel. Social psychologist and language expert Dr. James Pennebaker has used his groundbreaking research to show that our language, the everyday words we use, carries secrets about our feelings, our self-concept, and our social intelligence. He has published this intriguing information in his new book, The Secret Life of Pronouns, What Our Words Say About Us, and in it, he suggests that the words used by people ranging from Lady Gaga to William Butler Yeats, from Ebenezer Scrooge to President Barack Obama, can be very telling. We have copies of the book in the foyer, and I'm convinced you'll want one after you hear Dr. Pennebaker this evening. He is the Regents Centennial Professor and the chair of the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas at Austin, where he earned his PhD in 1977. In addition to his newest book, he's the author of more than 250 articles and author-editor of 8 other books, including Writing to Heal and The Healing Power of Expressing Emotions, which has been translated into more than a dozen languages. He's been featured in the New York Times, Scientific American, The Guardian, and many other publications all around the world. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Pennebaker.
It's a treat to be here tonight. Sadly, I'm not going to use PowerPoint because I believe it's evil. What I'd like to do is to take you on a journey of the research I've been doing for the last several years, trying to give you an appreciation of the nature of words and how we can think about words and how the words we use in everyday life reflect who we are, what we're doing, our relationships with others, and so forth. It's also helpful to give you a little bit of background. First of all, let me just warn you. If you came here thinking, oh boy, finally someone's going to be talking about pronouns, and maybe he'll talk about prepositions and articles, I've got some very sad news for you. I'm not a linguist. I don't understand linguistics very well. I'm a social psychologist, and as a social psychologist, my entire career I've been interested in essentially in what makes people tick. Why do people make the decisions they do? What's the nature of their relationships? And how is this related to personality? And it's only by a number of odd, kind of some flukish discoveries that I realized that things like pronouns and prepositions and articles are actually really interesting. My high school English teachers would be thrilled that I've finally come around. But they're interesting not because of their being a part of speech. They're interesting because as we look at them and we look at how we use them, they are telling us a lot about ourselves. Now, the story actually begins soon after I left graduate school in the 70s. And by the 80s, I was doing some research on how people come to know how they feel, the psychology of physical symptoms. Part of this work led me to come up with a questionnaire one day, and because here I had been studying symptoms for several years, but I never understood who got symptoms, who had lots of symptom problems and health problems. So, working with a couple of students and a colleague, we decided to come up with a questionnaire that would ask people anything we wanted. Now, for any students in this room, you've been told never ever do this. But in fact, it was kind of interesting because it was the first time I thought, let's just ask people anything we want. So we asked people about what they ate, where they're from. We asked them about their upbringing, and we asked one question that one of the students suggested was, how about, let's ask people if they've ever had a traumatic sexual experience prior to the age of 17. Now, this was 1979. Nobody ever asked that question. Now, of course, if you get a bank card, you have to answer questions like that. So what we did was we put that, it ended up being a very, very long questionnaire. We gave the questionnaire to about 800 women, college students, and we had them complete it. And what we discovered was about 15% of the women reported having had a traumatic sexual experience prior to the age of 17. And those who endorsed that item had every kind of health problem imaginable. It was really quite striking. And about this time, I was contacted by the magazine Psychology Today. And those of you above a certain age remember back in the 70s and 80s, that was the hot magazine. And they were going to be doing an article on physical symptoms. They knew that I'd been doing research on this. And they were going to put in a questionnaire in the magazine itself for their readers to complete. So they called and asked any questions that I'd like to have on it. And I said, yes, let's put this traumatic sexual experience question on and a few others, which they did. Now, this is not a random sample, but they got 24,000 responses of people filling out the questionnaire. And later, true national samples found virtually identical results to what we found. 22% of women and 11% of men reported having had a traumatic sexual experience prior to the age of 17. Those who endorsed that item were three times more likely to have been hospitalized for any cause in the previous year. They were more likely to have been diagnosed with cancer, high blood pressure, ulcers, colds, flus, major things, minor things. Having a traumatic sexual experience seemed to carry a significant risk with it. And that raised the next question. Was it something about a sexual experience, or was it something that's inherent to a sexual experience? And so we started doing more studies, because one thing we discovered was when, with that questionnaire in Psych Today, the editor had put in a little deal at the bottom of the questionnaire saying, if you'd like to be interviewed, put your first name and a phone number, and we might call you. And she ended up calling about a dozen people, all of whom had reported having had a traumatic sexual experience. They all had indeed had a traumatic sexual experience. But the thing that she reported to me that was so surprising was she said virtually none of them had ever told anybody about it. Or if they had, they may have told one or two other people. Many of them were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and said, this is the first time in my life I've ever told anybody about that experience. Well, we did later questionnaires, and we found that where we would ask people about different types of traumas, and we also asked how traumatic were they and how much had they talked to other people about the traumas. And what we found was sexual experiences were unique in the degree to which people kept them secret. And as we did more and more studies, the problem seemed to be, first of all traumas are bad for your health. There have been 2 generations of research on this. But what we found was having a traumatic experience and keeping it secret from others bumped up the health risk for that particular trauma. And it was about this time that I started to ask myself, what if we brought people into the laboratory and had them in some way talk about this big secret? Would it have any effects on their health? So we started doing research, and having people come in and actually talk about a trauma was too complex because a lot depends on how other people respond. So I thought, well, what if we just had people come in and essentially just write about a traumatic experience? And that's what we did. So in our first study, and the studies we did afterwards, what we did was we got a large group of people, and our first studies were with college students. We randomly assigned them to either write about a traumatic experience or to write about something superficial. And so just by a flip of the coin, they were assigned to the experimental group or the control group. Imagine the experiment. You come into my office and I said, okay, you've signed up for an experiment, and the experiment has some vague title like writing the college experience. And so you come in, you sit down and say, okay, you've signed up for an experiment, and here's what's going to happen. In a few minutes, I'm going to tell you what you will be writing about, but for the next 4 days, you will return, and every day I will have you write for 15 minutes. You'll be taken down to a room where you'll be by yourself, And in that room, you will write continuously about the topic that we give you. And the most important thing is I want you to really write continuously. Don't worry about spelling or sentence structure or anything else. At the end of 15 minutes, someone will knock on the door, which is a sign that your time is up. And what I'd like to have you do is put your experimenter ID on it, as well as fill out some questionnaires, staple them all together, and then drop them in a big box. You will never get any feedback about your writing. Different people will be asked to write about different topics. Some may be very personal, others may not. Are you willing to participate? Everybody always says yes. At this point, people are, by a flip of a coin, are put in the experimental group or the control. In the experimental group, they're told, okay, we're ready to begin. For the next 4 days, I want you to write about the most traumatic, upsetting experience of your entire life. I want you to really let go and explore your deepest emotions and thoughts about this. The event, you can write about the same event on all 4 days. You can write about different topics each day. That's entirely up to you. In your writing, you might tie this to other parts of your life, your childhood, your relationship with your parents, your relationship with other people in your life, your future, who you'd like to be in the future, who you've been in the past, or who you are now. But whatever you choose to write about, I want you to really let go and explore your deepest thoughts and feelings. And in fact, many people have never had a trauma, but all of us have had major conflicts or stressors, and you can write about those as well. Okay, so that was the experimental group. And the controls, we just had them write about superficial things. We had them describe the room they were in, the shoes they were wearing, or something like that. And then later we discovered that a particularly great one was to have people write about how they use their time, or time management, which I found to be an absolutely wonderful control group because people think it's beneficial, and we have never, ever, ever found it to have any value whatsoever. I don't want to be critical, though. In any case, it's the perfect control group. Well, what we found was this writing method was phenomenally powerful. The people asked to write about these traumatic experiences ended up going to the student health center. Oh, everybody gave their permission to allow us to get their student health center records at the end of the year. Those people who were asked to write about a traumatic experience ended up going to the student health center at half the rate as people in our control group, half the rate of people who were not in our experiment. Later studies, we did some early studies. I worked with Jan Kiko-Glaser and Ron Glaser, who were doing some cutting-edge work in psychoneuroimmunology at the time. We drew blood before people were assigned a condition, after the last day of writing, then again several weeks later. And we found that writing about these traumatic experiences was associated with enhanced immune functioning. And then this paradigm started to take off. Our first paper was published in 1986, and then other people started replicating it. And as of today, there are probably between 200 and 300 articles published on this expressive writing method. It's been looked at from people all over the world, labs, and looking at health problems, psychological issues, many, many things. The bottom line is writing serves as a really powerful way for people to stand back and reflect on their lives, and it ultimately is associated with major improvements in people's physical health. They sleep better afterwards, and I could go on and on about the health outcomes.